Republicans try and fail to replace their leader, who hid his drunk driving and weapons arrest from them.
And so we were trying to figure out how we could do this in such a way that it wasn't a big circus.
Too late. The elephants are fighting. We talked to migrants on the streets looking for work as the city of Denver considers whether the government might hire them. And $1 million theft from a business in town. Employees were the victims. Their employer was the thief. Tonight on Next. Republicans at the state capitol are not happy their leader hid his drunk driving and weapons arrest from them. Not mad enough to replace him for it, at least not yet. Minority Leader Mike Lynch insists that talking about his arrest once it leaked out is leadership. Politics guy Marshall Zellinger reports on whether he will remain the GOP leader.
Inside this hearing room, House Republicans met this morning to consider removing their leader, Mike Lynch.
To keep the integrity of the Republican caucus and our votes and our future votes, then I'm calling for this vote of no confidence.
That is the voice of Republican State Representative Scott Bottoms, who tried to oust Lynch as leader today but lost when the vote split 9-9.
We put him into leadership with him knowing that this was going to come out. To me, that's the opposite of leadership.
This time, sir, you are under arrest for driving under the influence of alcohol.
In September 2022, Lynch was arrested for drunk driving and possessing a gun while drunk. Last week, I asked him if he hoped to keep it secret.
I was realistic that, this would come out someday and I would face it like I'm doing right now, and that's what leaders do.
We put him into leadership with him knowing that this was going to come out. To me, that's the opposite of leadership.
You may know Bottoms from his other newsworthy moments. He's the far-right representative who said Jewish hostages held by Hamas need to turn to Jesus. He made a mockery of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts during a gas stove debate. And I asked him, who would he rather be leader?
Here's the 100% that I can give you. I do not want to be a minority leader myself. I have no desire for that. I will not accept a nomination for that at all.
And if there is a new leader, it will not be because Lynch quits. He put out a statement defending his leadership, and before the vote this morning, told his caucus why he was not stepping aside.
If I believed that this event, which occurred outside of this building, outside of this session, had an impact and was detrimental to my ability to perform this job, I would gladly step aside. I don't believe it does, and I don't believe that it did.
So we're just going to call for another caucus meeting tomorrow and make sure that everybody's available, and then we'll re-vote on this, and then it'll be done.
There are 19 Republican members. One of them, Stephanie Luck, just had a baby. She's tried to participate remotely today, but it didn't work out. The thinking would be that if she voted, Lynch would have been ousted 10-9. But I'm hearing from the audio of the meeting and representatives that were there was confusion over whether or not a yes vote meant to oust or to keep. And we don't know how the members voted because it was a secret ballot, Kyle.
And again, they are a super minority at the Capitol. So they've got this tiny caucus and they're fighting with each other about things. But at the end of the day, it really does come down to just kind of like interpersonal honesty, right? Like, it's not like a political issue. It's like, do people feel like the guy they put in charge pulled one over on them?
That's the sentiment that I'm hearing. But as you say, whoever is the leader of this party, if it continues to be Lynch or somebody else, in the grand scheme of legislation at the Capitol, that may not matter because the Democrats control everything. But in terms of your own party that you talk with every morning and who trusts you and who doesn't, that's kind of what this is coming down to, it seems.
Yeah, in some places you might say, who wants that job? And the answer is the dude on the video getting popped for a Dewey. He really wants the job, and at least for today, he still has it. Marshall, thank you. The most popular political party choice in Colorado is none, unaffiliated. Tomorrow, Colorado Republican leaders will go to court to try and block those unaffiliated voters from participating in GOP primaries. Republicans want to throw out Proposition 108. That's the state law approved by voters in 2016, the one that allows unaffiliated voters to cast a ballot in either party primary, but not both. Either party can opt out of this system if 75% of their party leaders approve. The GOP has been unable to clear that bar, so they want a judge to remove the bar. Traditional conservatives have said that excluding the largest voting bloc in the state is producing more radical Trump-affiliated candidates who can't win in Colorado. And you know what? Sure enough, the party's lawsuit essentially says it would be able to nominate more extreme candidates if not for all those pesky unaffiliated voters and Democrats that they think are switching registration to vote in GOP primaries. Republicans' attorney in this is John Eastman. You know him as the architect of the plan to overthrow the 2020 election and keep Donald Trump in power. Eastman is indicted in Georgia, facing disbarment in California, and working for Republicans in Colorado. He's a busy, busy man. The city of Denver is exploring the possibility of having migrants work for the city. It's a legal long shot, but Denver's leaders have not been able to convince the feds to loosen up work rules for migrants. Until then, intersections around the city are one place where migrants are commonly trying to make a living. Here's Mark Salinger.
Yo trabajo, trocito de corazón, Dios bendice, órale carnal.
On the corner of Federal and Alameda, work rolls up every time the light turns red.
Pues ya no hay corazón, Dios bendice.
Some drivers say they don't have cash.
Tranquila madre, Dios la bendiga.
Others roll up their windows quickly.
Ven acá, vale, para que me ayude.
But at 19 years old, washing windows is all Brian can do.
No tengo permiso. Eso es lo que no entiendo, ¿para qué nos dejaron pasar si no tenemos permiso de trabajo? Entonces, solo que buscamos trabajo y nos piden el permiso.
Brian is one of nearly 40,000 migrants who've arrived in Denver recently from the southern border. They don't have federal work authorization and can't be hired for most jobs.
Esto es pura agua.
Every car that stops is a chance to earn enough to pay rent and feed his 6-month-old daughter.
De corazón, le sale de su corazón y bueno. Porque esto es gratis, pero para que cualquier cosita que le salga a su corazón.
Gracias, canal. Corazón.
Street corners across the city are now filled with migrants with nowhere else to work.
Es difícil, no se encuentra nada ahorita.
David stands off Santa Fe every day,
De su corazón.
saving up the coins he earns to send back to his family in Venezuela.
Somos de personas de buen sentimiento, que venimos a trabajar.
More people wave him off than accept his offer to work for a couple of seconds in exchange for a couple of bucks.
Es la buena monedita.
Still, it's money.
Cambió.
Across town, every red light brings new customers
Gracias, madre, que Dios se lo multiplique.
for a group of people who want to work but aren't allowed to.
Gracias, thank you.
Denver Mayor Mike Johnson was in Washington this past week meeting with members of the Biden administration, trying to get federal work authorization passed, which would allow migrants to work. Right now, it doesn't seem like there's a huge appetite on the federal level for that. Either Congress would have to pass a bill changing the law, or President Biden could go through executive action on it. Right now, it's not really clear that either of those, Kyle, could become a reality.
So this idea of the city somehow getting involved as an employer, how might that work?
So it's a legal long shot, like you said, but it's something that right now the city is exploring. In the 1980s, President Reagan signed into law the law that prohibited private companies from hiring workers who do not have federal work authorization. But that law doesn't explicitly prohibit state and local governments from hiring those workers. It's something that's never been tested before in court, but today a spokesperson with the mayor's office told me that hiring migrants for those city jobs is a last-ditch effort that the city is exploring right now. A legal expert we spoke to from Ohio State, based here in Denver, says the city should prepare for a legal fight if they take that route.
But a close look at that law from 1986, and as it has been amended since then, makes clear that the law does not actually say anything about applying to state or local governments.
So here's where it gets even more interesting. The mayor's office tells me that they're well aware that if Trump wins the election in November, everything could change when it comes to immigration. There are fears that if the city of Denver hires migrants to allow them to work for the city, the federal government, especially under Trump, Kyle, could come in and say, we're going to criminally charge everyone who is hiring those migrants.
Safe to say Denver would be a target no matter what if Trump becomes president again, at least in efforts to perhaps work with Congress to withhold some federal funding from the city.
Exactly, but it might be their last effort to say, we need to find a way, any way, for them to earn money.
Mark, thank you. The man who stole a whole press run of the local newspaper down in Ouray, the one with a story about the police chief's stepson being accused of rape, that man now says he took the papers to protect the victim in the case, to keep people from knowing the details of those allegations. What actually happened then was that the story got national attention as media outlets from the New York Times to this newscast highlighted the story of the stolen newspapers. Paul Choate, who happens to own a restaurant in town as well, has been issued a summons for petty theft. Choate says that he realizes what he did in taking the papers was not appropriate. He returned the papers and offered compensation for the lost revenue. The sheriff's office says that Choate does not have a connection to the police department or to the sexual assault suspects. Choate says he objected to information about the alleged assault being published, and he took the newspapers in an attempt to protect the victim. Your generosity has lifted up a small nonprofit that keeps siblings connected when they get separated in foster care. You raised almost $14,000 for Elevating Connections, and that's not even counting the money donated through monthly gifts to the Word of Thanks Fund. And with that, your weekly giving has passed the $12 million mark. That is a lot of good done in a lot of small towns and big city neighborhoods across Colorado. If you know of any nonprofit that could use our help together as a group, please email me. Next at 9news.com.
We have a less than 72-hour window to start the medication right after exposure. That is a barrier.
The best way to protect someone who's been exposed to HIV is not new. Colorado's health providers hope for some newfound urgency in actually getting it to people. And some employers in Denver are paying their employees back and then some, because workers didn't get their due. That's next. The Denver Auditor's Office says 2 companies that hire gig workers stole their wages, denied thousands of people proper pay and overtime and sick leave. Gig work is flexible or temporary work assignments, so think like bartending, serving, general labor often. The Auditor's Office found that 2 companies, InstaWork and GigPro, misclassified those gig workers as independent contractors. Under state law, they are actually employees of the companies and therefore were entitled to minimum wage and other benefits. Companies were forced to pay almost $280,000 in restitution to the employees, along with more than $800,000 in fines. The IRS seems to enjoy making Coloradans sweat. Fresh off the IRS's decision not to tax Tabor refund checks this year, they've kind of gone back and forth on that, the state is now asking the IRS to say that they'll keep their hands off of Colorado's new family leave program. Governor Jared Polis and governors from 8 other states are asking the IRS to update their guidance on who is liable for taxes on state benefits like paid medical and family leave. Colorado's new paid leave laws went into effect this year. Employees and employers have been funding the program through payroll deductions for a year now. Governor says the IRS hasn't made it clear whether employees will also be liable for thousands of dollars in taxes on benefits if they use them. Governor says the last time the IRS put out new guidance on this was 2005, and that was before many states rolled out their family leave programs. Following a warmer weekend, Kathy Sabins here with a look ahead.
You know, Kyle, it looked kind of cloudy and murky and chilly today, but temperatures actually ran 10 degrees above average. And the evening drive well underway and no weather issues this afternoon. Same cannot be said in the high country. Some light snow coming down, but not enough to really impact travel, which is great news. That high of 55 in Denver, as I mentioned, way above average, almost 60 in southern Colorado today. That light mountain snow will continue off and on this week. Denver might see some flurries on Friday with an approaching storm. Today we're in between storms, one creating ice storm conditions from Oklahoma City, St. Louis, and Chicago. The next system moving on shore in southern California, headed for Colorado. Of concern tonight, though, is actually across the eastern plains with a dense fog advisory out and the potential for ice glaze conditions. Light snow across the Front Range foothills and higher terrain, but Denver will see clearing skies overnight, more sunshine tomorrow, and temperatures will run above average. But those of you headed east on I-76 or I-70, again, light ice glaze, freezing fog, certainly a possibility. Temperatures comfortable between now and about 10 o'clock tonight, and your extended forecast shows a warming trend until Friday. Cooler Friday with a few flurries possible, then back to sunshine and 50s for Sunday and Monday.
May I make a recommendation? I want to point you towards something that didn't come from us, but I think it's worth your time. It's a long read from New York Magazine on the family from Colorado who died while they were trying to live off the grid in 2022. It details how Becky Vance fell under the spell of conspiracy theories and told people that she needed to move to the woods to protect her teenage son. They and her sister died in a remote area of Gunnison County. The New York Magazine piece is a deeply reported picture of a mother's love and a mother's delusion and how it led that whole family to their end. Put a link in the next Facebook page and on the next section of 9news.com.
It's very powerful. We just need to use, I think it's underused.
Finding the pills to fend off HIV can be difficult. Colorado's health clinics hope that a global recommendation might change that. PEP is kind of like the morning after pill, but for HIV exposure. The quicker the pills are taken after an HIV exposure, less likely it is somebody will get it. For the first time in a decade, the World Health Organization is going to update its guidelines for the drug. And medical experts in Colorado told our Jaleesa Arizari they think it'll be used more.
What's a little sunshine without some snow? At the Colorado Health Network, the weather isn't the only thing changing.
Reduce stigma, improve treatment, access, all those things.
Jose Diaz is a nurse practitioner and HIV specialist here. Today he's talking about PEP, a medication someone can take within 3 days after being exposed to HIV.
A series of labs are going to be obtained to establish kind of like a baseline, and then 2 medications will be prescribed for 28 days.
The World Health Organization is looking to update the recommendations of the drug. The new guidelines will look to change service delivery approaches to improve the uptake and completion of PEP. They'll also recommend ways to promote the use in different places, often seen as inequitable.
So it's very powerful. We just need to use, I think it's underused.
Diaz says those inequities can be found even here in Denver. Because it's a special medication, not many pharmacies carry it.
In my experience, it takes about 3 to 4 days for these pharmacies to have the medication ready for the patient to pick them up. We have a less than 72-hour window to start the medication right after exposure. That is a barrier, and there's only a few pharmacies that are specialty pharmacies that for one, I know that the medication will always be in stock and ready for the patient to pick up.
Time is something many of these patients don't have. Diaz believes.
I would hope so, yes.
With new recommendations on the horizon, change could be powerful.
When the World Organization is updating these guidelines and making it available for a lot of us, that should make easier access for the patients on these therapies, for sure.
For Next, I'm Jaleesa Arizari.
PEP is covered by most health insurance, including Medicaid. Diaz says that they're doing more telehealth these days to connect with rural communities, where the pharmacy then tries to overnight the drug. I miss your feedback on the weekends. Thank you. That's actually not true. I play with my children with nobody yelling at me. I enjoy those days too, but we will have your feedback next. We finished with feedback. Emily writes in tonight to say, I'm fairly new to the area, so therefore new to local news. Hi, welcome, Emily. She says, I'm curious if the political slant on Next is intentional. I'm searching for local news that isn't so openly politically skewed against any Democratic view. So I used to do a thing in the olden days of the program where somebody would write in like Emily and say, you're biased against Democrats. And I would connect them with somebody who's written in to say you're biased against Republicans, CC them on the same email and say, would the two of you please discuss it amongst yourselves, come to a conclusion and get back to us. I don't do that anymore because politics is crazy and I'm concerned about people's safety. I would just say this, Emily, every person is biased because it's just our experience is coming through. What we try to do is set that aside, hold everybody, regardless of ideology, to a single standard. It's up to them how often they violate that standard. Kevin writes in about the GOP House superminority trying and failing to remove its leader. He says, is it the size of the caucus or how they use it that's important?